backed by hybrid system. So that's why I choose the title. My content components will be historical background, problem statement, general objectives, specific objectives, research question, conceptual framework, overview of literature, research gap methodology, summary of the findings, conclusion, recommendation. I will be suggesting further studies. So for the historical background of the title that I'm presenting today, I've chosen to divide it into 3 sections. First of all, how this problem is existing globally, how this problem existing regionally, and how is it existing locally in Somaliland area. So globally, the critiques of democracy has started during the era of third wave democratization after the collapse of Soviet Union. As we all know, third wave of democratization came to Africa and most parts of the world when the people had not had the know-how or the knowledge to take on that democratic practices. So due to those, there have been political instabilities in many of those countries that have adopted the system of democracy. Regionally, if I talk about the powerhouses in the region such as Kenya, Burundi, Uganda, and Tanzania, there's an African Charter for Democracy that was presented by the African community before 10 years ago, and it is still yet to be ratified. And these powerhouses have been criticized the lack of good governance and elections, because in these African countries, every now and then you will hear elections have been delayed, they have been postponed. There are a lot of corruptions existing. There are no proper rights of the individuals are not always withheld. If I come down to Somaliland locally, human rights, as has been reported by Human Rights Watch, are not always withheld. You will hear a lot of journalists have been arrested. Freedom of speech is not there. It has already happened with one of our lectures at the university, as you all know. So you cannot even bring out what you think, your ideas. You cannot even share your ideas publicly and how you feel. So that is the kind of democracy that you are serving in the country. So my problem is statement is that there is no effective democracy. Democracy is there, but it's not effective. It is not up to the limit where we can call it a legitimate democracy. There's no effective democracy in Somaliland. Reasons being, what are the indicators? Human rights are not respected. There are no gender equality. You will hear that women have been given quotas. But really, are these quotas available for women every now and then? Every election you will hear this section of this type of percentage is allocated for the women. So the next election, it is there, but nothing, no action will be taken out so that women will represent in the elections. Freedom of the press is not there, and also freedom of speech. These are the kind of indicators that show us that I have chosen to show us that there's no effective democracy in Somaliland. So in consequences, what might be the problem? So the problem might be people are not feeling part of the country anymore, because now there have been there have been powerful tribes, and there have been minority tribes. So every now and then, the power tribes take on the major seats. So the minority tribes are always told what to do, how to go about the elections, what positions they are likely to go. So this is now a narration of a story. People are all called, there's also Somalilanders, but they are not given the respect that they deserve. They are not given their full rights. So what can this cause? This might cause another civil war. As I have mentioned before, hybrid system has brought us back from the civil war, but we are now at a point where we need to move on. We are at a point where we need to say, this is enough, now let's move on. But now again, you will hear that the power tribes do not want to give up their positions. They do not want that. So the minority tribes wanted to come up. So here, a conflict will result initially. As we already see, there is already a revolt outside that has gone from Somaliland, and they want to fight even with the government. They are ready to do that. We are all aware of that. The objectives, the main objective that I want to present here is that find out how hybrid system affects the effective democracy. So specific objectives are to find out the demographic characteristics of my respondents, the efficiency of hybrid system, the level of democracy that the country is now running with, and also to determine the relationship between hybrid system and effective democracy. So these are also my research questions. What are the demographic characteristics? To know about my key study areas where I've done the research, the characteristics of those that I have questioned. How efficiency is the hybrid system in Somaliland? What level of democracy is the current government with? What is the relationship between hybrid system and effective democracy? So as for hybrid system, this is how I have structured my conceptual framework. So sorry, I wanted to move in and out, but you know I'm blocking the camera and I'm avoiding all of that so you can understand. So hybrid system, when you see me talking about hybrid system, what I mean is that I want to talk about religion, customary law, and culture. Those are the variables that I've chosen to represent for me the variable of hybrid system. So if I say hybrid system, it is synonymous with these three variables. And when I say democracy, I'm talking about rule of law, gender equality, and liberty. So the literature that I've reviewed consists of these sections: concepts, ideas, and opinions from authors that have written much about this study. The related study, I've chosen this related study to be Big Man and Democratic Republic in Melanesia. This is a small country, and the way it is represented very much is likely our representation in Somaliland. So this Big Man is also known as, is just like the chief or aqil or sultan of the community. So if you want to take part of the politics, you have to go to your community. Then you know you will know that you have to kind of promise some kind of gifts in reward if you are given that post. Then when your community agrees with you is when you come up to the power. So after serving all the people that have elected you, you will be paying back the reward your tribe has given you, because you have been elected by your tribe, not the whole community. So you will be representing them instead of the whole country. This is a scenario that is happening in Somaliland now, unfortunately. Also, theoretical perspective, I chose A Liberal Democracy by Farid Zakaria, 1977. So a liberal democracy is a kind of democracy where democracy is guided. There's democracy, but it is guided. So this kind of democracy, this kind of theory was applied by Hungary, the Prime Minister of Hungary, 2004, which his party, he mentioned that his party, he wants to lead the nation according to his wishes, not according to the constitution or what some kind of people agree. So long as he has the majority of the people. For example, his community is the biggest community, like most parts of the neighboring countries, such as Kenya. For example, the elections that happen in Kenya, most likely the Kikuyu communities always win the president. Why? Because they have the majority tribe. So this guy wants to dominate the population or the rest of the country because they are the majority. So this theory applies also in Somaliland, where always the majority tribe take on the opportunities. I would like to present also the research gap, as has been already notified by Horn, who has done research in Somaliland context 2006. He's already identified there's a gap of effect of hybrid system on effective democracy. So the other research that has been done about the topic, but they are not related, they are not anchored in Somaliland. They are mostly related to Russia, that have been hybrid system for a while. Research methodology. The research designs that I've applied are correlative and descriptive type of design. I use descriptive because of the nature of my variables, and I also use the correlation because I wanted to show the relationship between how hybrid system affects effective democracy. My research population. Okay, well, I will conclude. My research population is also 78. I've conducted the research from the Ministry of Constitutional Affairs in Sha'ab area, Somalia and Ardayda. My target population was 30 because there were only 30 that have worked in that department, the Department of Constitutional Affairs. My sample frame was 27, and the sampling procedure, I used the Taro-Yamani's formula of sampling procedure. Also, the research instrument that I used was a questionnaire. This is the sample size, which I've used the Taro-Yamani's formula of finding sample size, which I get a result of 27. My method of data collection was I've administered questionnaire / interview. I added the / and not and because some of my respondents were not able to understand English, so I had to translate it into in Somali. Then they will answer it, so I will help them out. My research measurement instrument, I've used the validity and reliability. My research has gained validity index of 0.7, and also it was reliable. I used the
and human resource management and leadership. And topic speaking Somali. My topic today is the impact of gender discrimination on women employment opportunity at Telesom company in Hargeisa, Somaliland. And the IV of my topic is gender discrimination, and the DV is women employment opportunity, and the case study is on Telesom company in Hargeisa, Somaliland. Gender discrimination, by definition, is the practice of letting someone's sex be the main factor when it comes time for recruitment or an employee benefit or promotion. Whereas women employment opportunities is the chance or the opportunity that people have when it comes to employment opportunities in the workplace. Moving on, the background of the study was divided into three, which was globally, regionally, and locally. Regionally being Africa and local being Hargeisa, Somaliland, where the case study is based on. Moving on, the problem statement. The population of Somaliland is growing quickly at 3.1%, and unemployment is currently at 80%, with 30% of the women being employed only and mainly in lower level jobs. Now the problem is that although Hargeisa is progressing into a modern society, women are still discriminated against for their gender. They're not looked at their qualifications, they're not looked at their skills, they're not looked at their experience. It's always about their gender. The purpose of the study was to establish the relationship between gender discrimination and women employment opportunity at Telesom company in Hargeisa, Somaliland. Now, the research objectives were four. The first one being to determine personal information of the respondents, which we will see later in chapter 4. It was analyzed using frequency and percentage. The second objective of the research was to examine the impact of gender discrimination on women employment opportunity in Telesom company at Hargeisa, Somaliland, and it will be analyzed using mean and standard deviation. The third objective was to find out the level of stereotype on women at Telesom company in Hargeisa, Somaliland due to gender discrimination. Again, the third objective was analyzed using mean and standard deviation. And lastly, the fourth objective was to establish the relationship between gender discrimination and women employment opportunity at Telesom company in Hargeisa, Somaliland, and it was analyzed using Pearson's correlation coefficient. Now, the significance of the study. The study was of significance to four: the researcher, future students, women in the society, and employers. How it was of benefit to the researcher was that it allowed me to enhance my knowledge to use all that I've learned in the past 3 years and put it into practical method. The research will be of benefit to future students as they can use my book as a sample to conduct their thesis in the future, inshallah. The study also helps women in the society to know their roles and rights when it comes to employment opportunity. And lastly, it will be of benefit to the employers as it will teach them and how not to discriminate against women based on gender. This is my conceptual framework. Here we have in front of us the independent variable and the dependent variable, which was gender discrimination and women employment opportunity. Under each variable, we have 3 indicators. The first one is bias, inequality, and stereotype. And in the second one, we have economic opportunity, nepotism, and culture. Moving on, we have the theoretical perspective. The theory that I've used is functional theory. It was developed in the 18th century by a sociologist named Emil Durkheim. By this theory, he said that society is divided into interparts. So how it is related to my study is that this theory states that gender inequalities is used as a means to separate women and men based on things that can't even be compared. Moving on, the literature gap. The gap that I faced is a contextual gap, as there was little or nothing said about the same thing on Telesom Company in Hargeisa, Somaliland. The research design used in my research was descriptive and quantitative and correlation. Descriptive and quantitative was used to analyze the statistics of the collected data, and correlation was used to establish the relationship between gender discrimination and women employment opportunity. Now, my target population was 28, and 28 of those respondents were from the HR department at Telesom Company in their headquarters. And the sample size that I received from the target population using Slovene's formula was 19. The research procedure used in my case study was systematic sampling procedure. I used a system of where I had a list of the respondents, and I selected every 3rd person out of that list to fill out the questionnaire. The data collection instrument used was close-ended questionnaires, and it was distributed to the 19 employees from the sample size. Okay. Here we have the validity and reliability. Validity, by definition, is just to know the relevance of your questionnaire, of your questions. So what I did was I gave out my questionnaire to 3 experts who rated it according to the. So the formula is numbers of items rated as relevant divided by total number of items rated in the questionnaire. Once I received the ratings from the 3 experts, the answer that I've got was 73%, which means that my questionnaire was valid, as 70% and above is valid. Moving on to the reliability that I received out of a pretest of 10 of my questionnaires was 0.839. It was 10 of those questionnaires were divided to employees at Warabi company. It's an import and export company. So I gave out my questionnaires to them, and the results that I got from that was 0.839, which shows that my research, my questionnaires were reliable because 70% and above is reliable. The findings that I had from my objective one, that majority of the respondents were aged between 31 to 50, mainly middle-aged, which is at 57.9%, and 17 out of the 19 respondents were male, which was at 89.5%. Moving on to the second objective, the findings, impact of gender discrimination. Majority of the respondents strongly agreed that there is a gender-inclusive culture in the workplace with the highest mean of 3.6316 based on the scale that you have in the book in front of you, you can see. And at the same time, many disagreed that women should be paid.
My thesis book, which title is The Legitimacy of Somaliland's Statehood Under the International Law and the Quest of Recognition. This work will not be possible without the guidance, advice, and the direction of my supervisor, Mustafa Mahmoud Abdullahi Al-Khalili. If I go through the contents that I'm going to cover in this presentation are the abstract of the study, the background of the study, problem statement, research objective and question, the conceptual framework, overview of the literature, theoretical perspective and the literature and research gap, the methodology that I used, the summary of the findings, conclusion, and finally I would suggest some useful recommendation to the government and to the international community. The study determined the legitimacy of Somaliland's statehood under the international law and the quest of recognition. The study was guided by the following objectives. The first objective was to explore the demographic character of the respondents in terms of age, gender, occupation, and education. The second objective of the study was to examine the legitimacy of Somaliland's statehood under the international law. The third objective was to analyze the quest of recognition practices in Somaliland, and the fourth objective was to address the relationship between the legitimacy of Somaliland's statehood and the quest of recognition. The background of this study was constructed by the following sections. In the first section of the study, it contains the historical background, which is divided by the globally, regionally, and locally. Second, there was a conceptual background. In the conceptual background, I gave the DV and the IV of my study definitions from other authors. In section 3, the theoretical perspective, in here I have mentioned the theory that I want to develop in my study in chapter 2. In the fourth section of the background, I mentioned the contextual background, which I mentioned the causes of the IV, which is the statehood, and the effects of the DV, which is the recognition. The problem statement of this study is the self-declared state of Somaliland proclaimed its independence in 18th May 1991. Since that, after 28 years, there is no single state recognized Somaliland, which has been the major issue of Somaliland politics today. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Somaliland report in 2016, the lack of international recognition has been the most obstacle of Somaliland's development. Quoted. When it comes to a development, that there is no single state which can develop alone without having a relation and a cooperation with other states. The lack of de jure recognition in Somaliland caused lack of foreign direct investment. It also caused lack of international personality. You can see that Somaliland now doesn't have international personality when we are talking about international arena. But if it gets international recognition, it can have that. And finally, it caused that the lack of recognition slowed down the international response to the emergency, such as droughts which happen every time. So on, in this respect, this research study discussed and elaborated the legitimacy of Somaliland's statehood under the international law and the quest of recognition. The general objective of this study is to explore the legitimacy of Somaliland's statehood under the international law and the quest of recognition. I don't have to mention the objectives you have seen in the abstract, so I will run. And the research question of this study are the objectives which are changed in a question form. The conceptual framework of this study, the indicators of the IV, which is statehood, are permanent population, divided territory, functioning government, capacity to enter into relation with other states, self-determination, and right of self-perception. The indicators of recognition, which is the DV of the study, are sovereignty, legal personality in the international law, and de jure recognition. The literature review of this study consists of the following sections, and it was divided in 4 sections. In the first section, which is concepts, ideas, opinions of authors, in this section the study discussed the concepts of both independent and dependent variables using the contribution of other authors. The theoretical perspective of the study, which is the second section of the literature, the study brought a theory which is related to the both IV and the DV. The related study, which is the empirical study which was done, the geographical area of the study was mentioned in this chapter. And finally, the research gap was mentioned in this chapter. So I'm pointing the theoretical perspective and the research gap. The study has employed both declarative and constitutive theories of recognition in order to provide theoretical conception which can give enough literature for the study. For over a century, there has been a great debate between declarative and constitutive schools of school of thought. And these theories both are related to the IV and the DV. They can relate to the recognition. When we are talking about forms of recognition, there are two forms of state can get recognition, whether they declare themselves that they want to be an independent nation, or they possess the statehood criteria, which are to possess permanent population, defined territory, and so on, to get constitutive recognition. The research gap of this study is a contextual gap. Though it's not yet done in Somaliland, this implies that it's a contextual gap in this study. The methodology that the study used is descriptive design, and this design was used to describe the nature of the variables and the population of the study. The study population are the whole staff of the ministry. The targeted population was selected from 3 departments of the ministry, which are 25 respondents, and the sample size of the study is 23, and get this number from using the formula of Sloveni's formula, which n is equals to sample size n small, and n capital is equals to population, and e margin of error. The departments were Department of Law, Department of Politics, and the Department of International Recognition, and you can see how I gave the number of the respondents. The sampling procedure of this study was simple random sampling, and this technique was used to give equal chance to the respondents that I'm going to collect the data and the information that were necessary to my study. The resource of data of this study were both primary and secondary data. The research instrument that I used to collect the data from the respondent was questionnaire. The validity of this research instrument was at 0.94, which the researcher calculated, or I have calculated the content of valid index, which equals to number of declared items divided by the number of total items, which is 17/18, and I got 0.94. The reliability of the research instrument is I used the method called test-retest method. In the data analyzed, in a whole, this thesis or this study used SPSS, but in a specifically objective 1 was analyzed using frequency and percentage, and objective 2 and 3 were analyzed using mean and standard deviation, and objective 4 was analyzed persona coefficients correlation. In the ethical consideration, I asked permission to the respondents to get the data that I want, and also acknowledged the authors that have contribution in my book or in my work, and give them citation and referenced them at the back of the book. The limitations that faced the study were, I have mentioned only the limitations that may change the result of the study. These limitations were something beyond my control, and first was the honest of the respondents, personal biases, such issues like that. Overview of the results and the analysis. In objective 1, which was to explore the demographic character of the respondents, the study indicated that about 60.9% of the respondents were male, while 39.1% were female. On the other side, the respondents were at a diverse age. About 43.5% of the respondents belonged to the age of 25 to 34, while 26.1% of the respondents belonged to the age of 35 to 45. And I ran out of time, so I'll go to the second objective. In the second objective, which was to examine the legitimacy of Somaliland's statehood under the international law, the findings of this objective showed that Somaliland fulfilled the international criteria of statehood according to Montevideo Convention. Also, the study indicated that Somaliland possessed permanent population and functioning government and capacity to enter a relation with other states. And recently we can mention the relation that Somaliland made with EU, United Arab Emirates, and so on. Also, the findings of this objective proved that Somaliland has defined territory which dates back to the colonial boundaries of Africa. Also, the findings of this objective pointed that the declaration of Somaliland was the desire of its people. In the third objective, which was to analyze the practices of question recognition in Somaliland, the findings show that Somaliland deserves international recognition and its self-determination was the desire of its people. The matter that holds back Somaliland's recognition, it's not a matter of legality, but it's a matter of politics and interest. Also, the findings show that Somaliland have a foreign policy with a defined strategy of questioning international recognition. And finally, the findings show that the international community, though the international community is ignoring the existence of Somaliland, and this holds back the recognition of Somaliland. In the four objectives which I was seeking or searching the correlation between the IV and the DV, the persona-product correlation result showed that there was a relationship between the IV and the DV. The relationship was weak positive linear correlation, and the relationship was at 4.423 double stars, and the significance of the study, which equals to B, was 0.44. In a conclusion, I have to conclude that Somaliland has possessed the criteria of the international law, and it needs it
to present the defense of undergraduate. And if I proceed my research, my title is The Role of Islamic Banking System on Economic Growth at Dar es Salaam Bank in Hargeisa, Somaliland. And if I define and my variables, my title contain two variables: and Islamic banking system and economic growth. Islamic banking emanated from Islam, which discourages concentration of wealth in few hands. And Islamic banking emanated from Islam, which discourages concentration of wealth in a few hands. Thus, the importance of Islamic banking system is to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor by modifying the distribution of wealth and economy resource in favor of the less fortunate. Islamic banking, also known as non-interest banking system, is a banking system that's based on the principles of Islamic Sharia or Sharia law and guided by Islamic encounter. If I define my DV or the problem was economic growth or low economic growth. And as we know, the economic growth is an increase in a nation's total wealth. Also, economic growth is the output or the high of output or GDP per year. My problem statement is, as we know, there is a low economic growth in Somaliland since the separation of Somalia in 1991. The economic growth of the country still needs to be developed. There are indicators which often show low economic growth in Somaliland, and the indicators are poor living standard, trade deficit, because our import is more than the export, high level of unemployment, and low per capita income. These are the indicators or the signs of the problem. And the problem can cause danger to our country. The dangers of the problem can cause is corruption, embezzlement, larceny, fraud, and bribery. All of these problems and the low economic growth can cause. And there is another problem that there is another causes or another dangers that the problem can cause, and they are inequality, wealth inequality. As we know, our country divided into classes. And as we know, there are a lot of causes in my problem, and some of my causes are low financial system, political instability, overpopulation, and low gross domestic product. The gap that was found during this study by the researcher was contextual gap, because this research was not done before in Dar es Salaam, or it was a little. And if I move on, research objectives, there are general objectives which are to find the correlation between Islamic banking system and economic growth, and there is also specific objectives which are to determine the profile of respondents in terms of age, gender, educational experience, and marital status. The second objective and the second specific objective is to determine the level of Islamic banking system at Dar es Salaam Bank in Hargeisa, Somaliland. The third objective is to determine the level of economic growth in Hargeisa, Somaliland. And the fourth objective is to determine if there is a significant relationship between Islamic banking system and economic growth. And if I move on, the research question, I have answered all of these questions. The first question I have answered during preparing this research is, what's the demographic characteristics of the respondents in terms of age, gender, educational background, experience, and marital status? The second question that I'm going to answer is, what's the level of Islamic banking at Dar es Salaam Bank? The third question is, what's the level of economic growth in Hargeisa, Somaliland? And the fourth question is there any significant relationship between Islamic banking and economic growth? If I move on, the scope of the study, as we know, this study contains geographical scope, which indicates the area of the research or the case study, which is Dar es Salaam. Content scope, which indicates the variables IV and DV, and theoretical scope, which indicates the theories that the researcher implemented. I implemented profit and loss theory and Islamic banking theory. And the fourth scope was, or is, time scope, which indicates the time the research has been conducted, which is 4 months from February to May. If I move on, significance of the study, this study will be beneficial for the following: business organizations in Somaliland, and especially for entrepreneurs, those starting a new business and those already have started. And this study also will be benefit the Islamic banks in Somaliland as a whole, and that especially Dar es Salaam Bank. The significance of this study will be government. The findings and recommendation of this research will be used by the decision makers of the Ministry of Finance, and the fourth significance or the group that will benefit this research is business students, as they will use this research for further in their future research. The conceptual framework is Islamic banking, which is subdivided into musharaka and mudaraba, and economic growth, which is subdivided into potential growth and actual growth. Intervention variables are investment, inflation, and lows. And if I move on, a theoretical perspective, I used or the researcher implemented 2 theories. The first theory is profit and loss sharing theory, which indicates possible pooling resources together by provider and user of funds in order to take part economic growth of the country. Profit and loss theory also reveals that applying good Islamic banking system will result good economic. And there is another theory I applied or I implemented. This theory is theory of Islamic banking. According to this theory, banking is when applied with Sharia law, and all of the society can share the profit and loss. Or this theory also indicates, and as we are a Muslim society, there will be no interest or zero interest. This theory encourages justice and fairness among the society by applying Islamic models of finance in order to create a favorable environment toward economic growth. And the empirical study, there were previous studies that were done, and not in our country, but in other continents such as Pakistan, Uganda, Kenya, Malaysia, and Bangladesh. The research gap was contextual, because this study was not done before in Dar es Salaam, or it can be a little. And the research design I have used are 2. I used correlative, descriptive correlative design, and case study design. I have used 2 design, descriptive correlation and case study. And research population were 60. I excluded 26 and taken 24 as a target population. That I simplified the sample size using Slow-Friend's formula. And here is a sample frame. As you can see, this is the sample frame. Sampling procedure. My sampling procedure is simple random sampling. As we know, we have to take equal chances for each respondent. Research instrument I have used was questionnaire and interview. It means I use it both qualitative and quantitative and mixed approach. Validity and reliability of the instrument are 15 over 21 times 100. It was 70, and I use it content validity formula, or CVI. It's a formula used to memorize or to show in validity. Limitation of the study are fewer amounts of data and information. While I were conducting the questionnaire, there were a few amount of data and information because some employees were keeping their confidentiality. The second limitation of the study is difficulty in generating reasonable, adequate, and reliable information from respondents. The third limitation is lack of available time. The fourth limitation is lack of skills, experience, and competency in some respondents in their interview. And the fifth limitation is a busy schedule of the respondents. Here is the demographic characteristics. As we see, majority of the respondents were male, and according to their age, the majority of the respondents were within the age group 20 and 40. Marital status, majority of the respondents were married. As we can see, their percentage was 35.5. According to work experience, a majority of the respondents working 3 years. Educational level, majority of the respondents were bachelor, educated with bachelor. The benefit of the face sheet are that the research paper will be appropriate and reliable. This is the benefit that the face sheet will give us, is that we get appropriate and reliable research paper. To show that data has been collected from different sources, that's why we use different face sheet, gender, marital status, experience to collect reliable information from different sources. Another benefit of the face sheet is to prevent any bias among the respondents. And as we can see, the average mean of the level of Islamic banking at Dar es Salaam is very high, which is 3.46, and the level of economic growth is 3.47. And there is a high relationship. There is a high relationship between their correlation. There is a high relationship between Islamic banking and economic growth. As you can see, strong interpretation or person's value was 0.711, while level of significance was 0.069. Interpretation where from this numbers is strong significant correlation. It means there is a strong correlation between Islamic banking and economic growth, and they are directly proportional. It means if we enhance or if we make our Islamic banking system very good, that our economy will grow and enhance and foster forward through socio-economic prosperity. And here is the conclusion. The purpose of this research paper is to identify the main issue of Islamic banking system and economic growth. And here is the conclusion. There is a significant positive relationship between Islamic banking system and economic growth. And here recommendation. This recommendation have been made while I have conducted the research. The first recommendation is Islamic banks, particularly Dar es Salaam Bank, should deeply understand and committed with concept of Islamic banking and Sharia complement. The second recommendation is the marketing department of Islamic banks, especially Dar es Salaam, should increase their marketing activities. And the third recommendation is Islamic banks, especially Dar es Salaam, should promote investment in order to enhance employment opportunities, well-being, and living standard of our society, and to increase our trade level. The fourth recommendation is that the government should assist and help Dar es Salaam, and also to check whether